with that, let's turn in our Bibles to Luke chapter 22. This is probably one of the saddest chapters in the history of humanity. For it speaks of the betrayal of Jesus Christ by Judas Iscariot. Imagine, if you will, for 3 years, the apostles walked with Jesus intimately and personally. They ate with him. They fellowshiped together. They pursued the works of God as a team. They were led by the Spirit of God and by the Lord's instruction himself. All truth, all righteousness, all goodness, all holiness was before them constantly. And yet one chose to betray him. I don't know a greater pain in life than betrayal. Someone that you've trusted in, took comfort with, stood together in, turning their back on you, renouncing you, despising you. Maybe you made a pledge to another to love them till death do you part, only to find that they departed with someone else. And it breaks your heart because you had hoped to share in a love that was beyond romantic feelings or any other kind of temporary love to an eternal love, a love like the love God has for us. This is what Jesus was about to encounter at the hand of one of his own. The die had been cast. The religious leaders of Israel had made up their minds. Jesus of Nazareth must die. They refused to believe his claim to be the Son of God. They refused to believe in the miracles that he performed. They refused to even trust in the record of his lineage as the Lion from the tribe of Judah. So they turned to the dark side. They found a willing participant in Judas Iscariot. Judas had become disgruntled by Jesus' being non-political and not opposing Rome. So Judas chose to be a sellout. And we'll examine this in detail this morning. First by looking at Judas's demonic possession and then his exit into the night. Verses 1 through 6 of Luke's Gospel. Let me get back there, all right? Luke's Gospel, chapter 22. We read in verse 1, "Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. And then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains, how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he promised and sought opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of the multitude." Jesus had won the hearts of the crowds. His teaching, his love, his power on display, his ability to heal the sick, to cast out demons, to raise the dead, to feed people with incredibly inappropriate means, blew the minds of those who saw it and even those who only heard of it. And the Roman leaders, instead of rejoicing that their Messiah had come, instead chose to hate him. To hate him. It was the most holy time of the year for the Jew. It was the feast of unleavened bread known as Passover, when they would take a sacrificial lamb without spot, without blemish, young, safeguard it in their own home to make sure nothing would happen to it, and then slaughter it on the Passover, shedding its blood and putting it over the doorposts and the lintel of their door as a sign of their faith. It was a symbolic work indeed of what Jesus Christ would do for the sins of the world and his own people. Passover was a testimony to the redemptive work of God for Israel. For 430 years they lived in bondage as slaves, beaten by taskmasters' whips, fed the minimum requirement to survive, living in obscurity and poverty and brokenness. They suffered over and over and over again until God sent the deliverer, Moses. And he redeemed his people out of the land, made a covenant with them, established this covenant with the 10 Commandments that they should live by. And the people rebelled. They didn't keep it. They would blow it over and over and over again. And they did it at their own risk, as God will send conquerors. And he broke the people. They were now living under the opposing work of the Romans. And they were miserable. And they were looking for a deliverer. They thought Jesus might be the one. But Jesus instead spoke of salvation and the things of eternal life, and not just being free from Rome. You see, Passover, again, was a testimony of redemption, the work that God alone could accomplish for the believer. What God had done for the nation of Israel, the nation refused to do for their own Messiah. At the height of the religious calendar, all the spiritual leaders of the nation could think of was murder. The chief priests and scribes looked for an opportunity to commit murder. The captains here weren't the Romans, but spoke of the captains of the temple guard. They were all in on it. Their fear was that Jesus would become Israel's new hero and would take their place in the nation's eyes. God the Son had proven his power by miracles, raising the dead to life, as I said earlier, opening the eyes of one born blind, never before seen, fed the multitudes with impossibly insignificant resources. And so the leaders saw him as a threat instead of a blessing. A threat that needed to go away. So they sought the opportunity to kill the Son of Man, the Son of God. And these thoughts of several hundred thousands of Jewish visitors in Jerusalem motivated them to the fact that something had to be done. Jesus' amazing influence could arouse an even bigger following. And Satan, the enemy of our souls, had an idea that he knew they would like. Satan saw his opportunity. Verse 3 reminds us that Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12, one of his closest disciples. And know what verse 4 says. So he went his way. I think the translator should have put that in italics to emphasize his way. and conferred with the chief priests and the captains of the temple how he might betray him, Jesus, to them. Now, the Lord was giving the religious leaders of Israel an opportunity to deny this desire. They could have said, this is too risky. He could be the one that could lead us in rebellion against Rome. He has the people. He could be the one that leads us into freedom. We know this fight. Well, our forefathers knew this fight. They were ruled by a ruthless, merciless king in King George, who demanded taxes and excruciated much payment from the people over and over and over, taxing everything. Tax and spend was his motto. Where have I heard that before? Oh yeah, our government. Did you guys give him permission to do that to you? Did you say, go ahead, raise our taxes? Go ahead, cause inflation? Go ahead, make it impossible for us to go on family vacation this year, even to Disneyland? Did you guys vote for that? You did if you voted for the last party that's in power, even though he was nice and the other guy was a bully. We don't elect a commander and buddy. We elect a commander in chief, someone who will lead us and direct us in the paths of greatness. And that's what we have an opportunity to do on Tuesday. The other one is in denial. They're trying to recast themselves as caring and will take care of you and change the course of our last 4 years. Well, why'd they do it in the first place then? Oh yeah, and they're going to secure the border now after thousands upon thousands of millions of illegal aliens have entered our land, breaking our laws, taking over communities like in Colorado. Their home countries that they still wave their flags for and rejoice in did an amnesty program for these people, releasing them into the United States. Oh, joy. Oh, rapture. How wonderful. We have all these criminals now running our streets who are lawless and could care less about anyone else but themselves. Our nation was founded on sacrifice, a committal to the greater good of all and not just the individual. That is what made our nation great and continues to keep it great. We're the first ones on the scene when there's trouble. Even our Christian groups like Samaritan's Purse and others, whenever there's a calamity in the nation, they're there with food, water, blankets, housing. We're there to meet the needs of those who are hurting. And yet all the heathens want to talk about is when the church is asking for money or the church has been caught in some kind of scandal. And you know what? We deserve to be outed if that's what we're doing. But you never hear about the good stuff the church does, like our feeding the homeless. We'd do it more if they'd let us, but they don't. We used to go to the park with food and give it out. They stopped us. We used to go to the feed station in Corona for years and serve there till they stopped us. And now, we're standing with the Homeless Project only because, I might add, that Pastor Ron Roper, one of our assistant pastors for many years, his wife runs that department for the city of Corona and bought that old hotel, that old Ayers Hotel, and established a work. She found the money to get it done and then asked if we would join in. And we said yes. Because that's who we are. That's what Christians are. Give, and it will be given unto you, Jesus said. Pressed down, shaken, overflowing. And some people have the opinion, all the church cares about is money. No. What this church cares about is touching other people's lives. First with the gospel, and then secondly with acts of love. That's who we are in Christ. That's what we've learned to become. Judas saw this firsthand in the Messiah, and he still decided to betray him. He joined these wicked men, verse 3 said. Judas, knowing Jesus' way, knew Jesus would not become an insurrectionist. He, that is Satan, took the opportunity to enter Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' 12. But I need to say this. Satan can only go where there is opportunity. Satan cannot enter the life of the Christian, the believer. He is already, if you will, possessed by the Spirit of God. Light and darkness cannot exist together. It is either one or the other. Here Judas became one with the darkened hearts of Israel's religious leaders. Judas took matters into his own hands, verse 4 told us. So he, Judas, went his way. Judas sought out the chief priests and the temple officers to betray Jesus into their hands. Satan, the creep that he is, had always sought opportunity to undermine Jesus' redemptive work. The best example was the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness, when Jesus was hungry after 40 days of fasting. Understatement of the year. I'd be starving after 40 minutes, not 40 days of fasting. And there he was, praying, confronting the challenge that awaited him, his death at Calvary. And Satan came like the creep he was and said, hey, if you're the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. What do you think? Go ahead. The Father would understand. You're hungry. 40 days. You're amazing. I'm surprised you've lasted this long. No one would be upset at you taking care of your physical need. Yes, you're God the Son, but hey, you've got a body. You're living in it, and you're subject to its ways. So just make this stone into bread. It'll be all right. Get behind me, Satan, was Jesus' response. How many times have we betrayed the Lord, making a vow and then abandoning it because we thought it was too hard? You know, we read this after his temptation, that is Satan, failed. In Luke 4:13, Luke wrote, when the devil had ended every temptation, he departed from Jesus until an opportune time. Judas's move to betray Jesus was an opportune time. What blows my mind is the response of the religious leaders. Rather than being suspicious, even outraged, that someone would dare come to them with this kind of idea of murder, it says they rejoiced. They rejoiced. Verse 5, and they were glad. That term glad is not a good translation of the word. It literally means rejoice. They rejoiced and agreed to give him money. Money. Amazing. Amazing. The Greek word is kairo. It literally means rejoice. They were so happy over Judas's decision that they were even willing to give him money. In Matthew 26:15, Judas said, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you? And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver, or 30 days' wages. Approximately today's worth, about $91,000. Or no, excuse me, $91. $91. 30 days' wages, roughly, for the bearer of that silver. Now, I want us to turn over to John's gospel so that we might fully grasp the extent of this betrayal. Turn to John 13. In verses 1 and 2, John set the scene. Now, before the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from the world to the Father. Having loved his own in the world, he loved them to the end. After supper, the devil put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray Jesus. Jesus, at this supper, reached out to Judas. In verse 18, turn there to verse 18 of John's Gospel. Well, let me get there. Verse 13, verse 18. We see this. Jesus saying about his betrayer, I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scriptures may be fulfilled, he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am. Most assuredly, I say to you, verse 20, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me, speaking of the Father. And when Jesus had said these things, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, most assuredly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Jesus knew what Judas was doing. But this did not keep Jesus from showing Judas his complete love for him. Jesus reached out to Judas's declining soul. Jesus wanted Judas to know that he knew Judas's heart in this matter. And Jesus singled out Judas. I do not speak concerning all of you. Then he quoted Psalm 41:9. Even my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. David was speaking in reference to Ahithophel, King David's friend and trusted counselor who betrayed David. Jesus' parallel between Judas and Ahithophel was brilliant. Why? For Ahithophel's end was this. In 2 Samuel 17:23, it says that he put, that is Ahithophel, put his house in order and then hung himself. You see, Jesus addressed Judas via the 12, saying, my friends, Ahithophel is among us. He is at this table. He is eating our bread. Can you imagine the shock and the horror of the other 11 sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, he knows all. Is he thinking that I might do this? I mean, they went around the room and said, Lord, is it I? Is it I? Is it I? They were terrified at the fact that they might be one of them, or the one, because he said, at this table, at their place. Jesus assured the apostles of their place when he said in John 13:20, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. You are mine, and I love you. R. Kent Hughes said, after he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit. I imagine his voice maybe even cracked, said R. Kent Hughes. In verse 21 of John 13, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. He was probably choked up by this. Trouble in spirit is the same word that he used when he earlier said in 12:27, now my heart is troubled. This is when he contemplated his mission in death. Here his sorrow was now visible. All of it by betrayal. This left the disciples perplexed. In verse 22 we read, then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. And now there was one leaning on Jesus' bosom, one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. John could never bring to saying his own name about that, but it was John. And Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask the Lord of whom he spoke. Hey, find out. You know? Peter can't stand to be outside the know that way. Then leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said to him, Lord, who is it? This is their desire. The disciples saw Jesus' emotion, but they did not guess it was over Judas. Judas saw it all a few feet away in the flickering candlelight. His cold heart may have jumped when Jesus said these words, but the murderous determination he had remained within him. And John's insight from Jesus, well, it spoke to all of them. John, being the youngest of the 12, sat next to Jesus on his right-hand side. Judas was on his left, the place of honor. Can you imagine? Jesus knew what Judas was going to do and still sat him on his left side in the place of honor. That would cast the least amount of suspicion upon him. Who is it, Lord? Up to this point, Jesus held out for the possibility of Judas changing his mind. Again, R. Kent Hughes said Jesus revealed a remarkable truth. Just before the cross, just before the nails would pierce his body, Jesus' heart was troubled, not for himself, but for another. Hey, it was too late for Judas. It was too late. Look at verse 27. Well, let's go back to verse 26. Jesus answered, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. Jesus pointed him out. Went right over the disciples' heads because Judas was in the place of honor. Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. And then Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to Judas. For some thought because Judas had the money box that Jesus had said to him, buy those things we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. Having received the piece of bread, he then went out immediately. And John noted, and it was night, the hour of darkness. Jesus had kept this matter strictly between himself and Judas the whole way. The others thought Judas, who kept the money, needed to purchase supplies or give something to the poor. Sadly, Judas, in making his decision to betray Jesus, left him as a tool in Satan's control. Having been in close proximity to John and Jesus, Judas knew he had been found out. And rather than crying out for forgiveness, say that again. Rather than crying out for forgiveness, final opportunity, last chance, he could have said, Lord, forgive me. I don't know what came over me. I'm just so disappointed. I thought you were going to deliver us from Rome's oppression, but you chose another path. So I sold you out. I don't know why you did it. Yes, you do. You were ticked, and you thought you could make some money off of it. That's basically what it was. Imagine that. Jesus, Son of God, creator of the universe, all powerful, all knowing, all loving, and he treated him as a bum, as a worthless fool who didn't give him what he wanted. How many people have you known that have done that to the Lord? Came to Christ in times of crisis, going through difficulties in their lives, being delivered through prayer and encouragement and the scriptures. They now stand as a reprobate, being tested and found out to be false as they walk away from God and resort back to their old ways because it was easier, because they just wanted to have fun. We go out to U-Turn for Christ regularly as a church. We've done it for over 25 years now. And every time we go, there's the same crowd there, not the same persons, but those who've failed miserably in being able to control substance abuse. They're there because they can't stop drinking or doing drugs. They've ruined families, households, careers, you name it. There was even a pastor there at one time, senior pastor of a church in San Diego County, who had a penchant for crack cocaine. And somebody, in his former life, when someone came in for counseling and gave him his crack cocaine, rather than flushing it down the toilet like he should have done, he put it behind his desk on a mezzanine and helped the man, put him in a program to get deliverance. But there greeting him when he returned to his office was his weakness. And after a while, rumors were going around the city about a pastor who was doing drugs with the druggies at this certain neighborhood. And it was this man. He was overtaken by his former ways and found in a place of ruin as a result of it. God restored his life. He's walking with Jesus. But the position and authority and glory he once knew, the respect he had as a servant of God, he threw away. That's the kind of betrayal God suffers millions and millions of times a day by the people who say they love him. But he knew that going in. He knew we were but dust. He knew we were weaknesses. And he knew our need for redemption and salvation. So he came. And he died. And he rose again. And he proved himself to be God the Son. He had to endure such rejection, such misery, such betrayal as he did. He had to. And he embraced it. He embraced it. A new darkness filled Judas's soul. And he was nothing more than walking dead. For Judas, our Kent Hughes said, it was the night that would know no morning, no sunrise, no redemption. My prayer for all of us, myself included, is that we would never get to that place, but instead that we would press on to the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Because God has called you to a higher place. God has called you to a place of glory, personal glory, in which he's invited you to excel and to rise above your circumstances, conditions, even frustrations, to a place of honor, dignity, respect. He loves us, and he died for us, and we love him as a result. We see his goodness in our life. And the joy of salvation is yours to own today, right now. You can be delivered from any fears, any frustrations, any weaknesses, failures, betrayals that you've committed or have been committed against you. You can have the ultimate victory in Jesus Christ and no one else. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the cross, for what you did for us to deliver us from evil. And Lord, this morning I pray for all of us sitting here today. We have many challenges before us. Every single day of our lives, the tempter is there, seeking to destroy us from the inside out. But there is grace with you. There is mercy. There is unlimited love and a delivering power to free us from sin's bondage.